Hi everyone, and welcome back to Build Your App for Fun. Today we are going to build an app that will help us to split the check with our friends. It's something we've always done. It's something we are quite familiar solving that problem. You go to a restaurant, you order something. How are we gonna solve this problem? So the reason why I chose this is because you guys are familiar with it. And it's something that will demystify programming. The formula that we're going to be solving is that the total of the bill will be the subtotal times the tip multiplier times the tax multiplier divided by the number of friends. And why am I putting tip multiplier and the tax multiplier? Because it's easier to have something that you multiply, like say if it's 15% tip, you can multiply it by 1.15, and the tax in LA is 10%. You can multiply it by, it would be 1.1%. So this makes it easier rather than thinking in percentages and stuff like that. So this is how we're gonna try to solve our problem. And it should make it a lot easier. So then the question that we always have to answer in situations like this is, what is our user interface going to look like? So I started with a blank project where I have absolutely nothing. And the way that I'm going to build this is that I'm going to drag a label. Also, I'm going to drag a text field. And this label is just going to tell me how many people. The goal with all these labels and all these components is to work as an input for these values. I'm going to highlight them in yellow. We're going to need 1, 2, 3, and 4 inputs into our program. I'm putting how many people, then we're going to add another label that I'm going to say subtotal of bill, and then we're going to add another text box to be able to fill it in. As far as the tip, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but some receipts usually have like 10, 15, 20%, or 15, 18, 20%. So as a way to, like, you know, suggest you how much. So what I'm gonna do is that I'm gonna put just to also vary the experience that we get with controllers, I'm gonna go for a list picker and also another label right in between these two to tell us how much tip are we gonna give. And then last but not least, we're gonna add another label that we're gonna present to the user, how much tax. And for that, I'm going to put another text box here. And after that, I'm gonna set up a button that will say calculate. When we're done, we're just gonna press that. And where are we gonna display the results? Well, we need another label that we're gonna put down here. And for now, this one, I'm gonna put it empty. So now we're dealing with multiple components. And if we go into the blocks area, we're gonna see label 1 text box. That is gonna make us be confused. That is gonna make things difficult. So what we're going to do is that we're going to rename all those inputs into meaningful names. What I would like to do is to give them a proper name. So in this case, I am going to select this guy down here, and I am going to rename it to be, let's say this is for the amount of friends. So the old name, I'm going to change it to friend count. The second one, I'm changing it to subtotal. This one, I'm changing it to tip list because it's a list. And then this guy, I'm gonna change it to tax input. Actually, let's just make sure that all these have the input. This one has a list, which is fine. This one is an input. This one, input. That way we do not confuse them with other things that we're doing. Also, what we wanna do is that we wanna give them the proper width so that they fill in the right values. So I am going to go back and select all these guys and then change them so that way I can use the proper width. Okay, now we gotta rename the label and we're gonna call it total display. And with this one, I'm gonna fill in the parent to make it occupy as much space downwards as it has available, and also width to make it look bigger. Also, I'm gonna make the font maybe, I don't know, 28 pixels, and let's put something here. I'm gonna make it bold, and now we have our UI, except for one thing. What I want to do is that I want to add 15, 18, and 20%. This is text what I'm setting it up, and I am separating it by commas. Those are the options that are going to be available when I go into the emulator. But for now, I would recommend you guys checking it out. Let's actually connect this to the emulator as it's loading. Okay, so now we have this. And by the way, the fact that we're reviewing this allows us to see that we did not put a hint. A hint is just a text to tell people how they should put it. So we're gonna tell how they should put the data. So what I'm gonna put here is that I'm gonna set up input the amount of friends you are with. Also, I'm gonna change it to numbers only. Same thing for the subtotal of the bill and the tax. In the subtotal, I'm gonna say the bill's subtotal. And then how much tax? We're gonna write the percentage tax in your area. So again, we selected numbers only to restrict that we're gonna only receive numbers. We're gonna also fill in the hint, and our thing should look like this. Okie doke. So, assuming that all that is okay, then I want to move on to the blocks. But as I'm going to the blocks, I want to explain a couple of important concepts. First of all, I want to help you understand what is a procedure, because in our agenda today, we're going to talk about procedures, we're going to talk about control structures, and some logic and some math concepts. So first of all, let's talk about what is a procedure. A procedure, it comes from, if you guys remember your math classes, typically they're also known as functions. A function, if you guys remember, we had that a function was x and y. Function the x equals x, which essentially means y equals x. Then we get a line like this, and that line is essentially the same value for these guys, right? If we had, you know, function of x equals x squared, it goes something like this. And the idea, as you guys remember in your math classes, is that whatever you do inside of a function, you're going to pass arguments, and it's going to do work and return value. So a function is basically that. It's going to do some work and return values. Okay, if we are then into this, I would like to make sure that the way that I calculate this guy, and the entire thing are gonna be my procedures. I would say that probably the easiest one is to get the tax multiplier. So I'm gonna go to the procedures thing here, and I'm gonna select, since we said that it's going to do some work and return something. Notice there are some that don't return anything, but here, this one that says to procedure do whatever, this one does return a value. So what I'm going to do is that I'm gonna call it get tax multiplier. This is the easiest one, if you will. And what I'm going to do here is that in the math area, I am going to say that if somebody puts in the emulator, like say 10%, if they put 10, I need to convert it to the proper 1.1 multiplier. So in order for me to do that, that means that I am going to grab a division, and also I'm going to pass an input. And this input is going to be the input value. I'm going to name it input value so that it's evident. So in my thing here, I am going to connect it for now, and I'm going to get this guy, input value. Actually, I'm going to put it here, because if somebody tells me, let's go back to this, that if they're going to have 10%, I need to convert this into 1.1, which means that this value, I'm going to divide it by 100. So that way it becomes 0.1. And then afterwards, so that I have a complete picture of something, I'm going to add 1. So it's going to be 1 plus value divided by 100. That's what my tax multiplier is going to be. 1. Okay. So if we take that as true, then also we need to add another math function that is going to add a number 1. So you can see that here I go to the number, drag it in here. I'm going to put 1 plus whatever this guy comes in here. And then, because we said that we were going to divide it by 100, now you can see that, that this guy here matches 1 plus the value divided by 100. This is our function. Now, there's something that we're not going to use right now in this class, but if we were going to reuse a function, I could technically put it in my backpack and we'll be storing it. And I can just, bringing the functions as I need them. I just wanted to highlight this because this is a place where we can store some functions and create libraries with it. Then the next one that I would like to tackle, now that we've got this piece of the puzzle, we got to solve now. We're going to move into the next one, which is Tip Multiplier, which is a little trickier. Because if we go here, we're going to get this. Oh, by the way, if we select whatever value, it's saying text for list picker. So we should go and fix this text and say, how much tip, or tip percentage. And now if we go back here, now we have a tip percentage and we have 15, 18, 20%. Okay, so what I would like then to do is that I'm going to name this procedure get Tip Multiplier. And in this case, I'm also going to get one input because this is what I'm going to put the value. So this function, I'm making it as independent as possible. I am not calling anything directly here on the screen because I want this thing to be as independent as possible. Then we are going to say, we're going to grab, actually, in this case, this is where we need to start switching into what is a controlled structure. And I'm going to draw again in the whiteboard. So a controlled structure is something that allows us to go through the flow of the process and figure out if something happened, then we go one route, if it's true, and if it is not, then we go another route, and then continue with our process. So basically, we can say, for example, let's just use another example. If one person had a drink or something more expensive, then that person should probably pay a little bit more. There's no reason why, that should be split. Then we can calculate the extras for that particular person. And if it didn't happen, then do something else. That is an if, and it allows us to control the flow of the program. That's why they are known as control structures. The next control structure that I want to talk about, it's loops. So this is a conditional one, and for the conditional ones, just to conclude that, we have if then, if else, and then if else. So the idea is that you can have multiple options. If you didn't ask for ice cream, then can I offer vanilla? And if you didn't like that, then I offer strawberry. So it's a multiple choice way of exploring the control flow with if, then, else, if, then, else. Else is a catch-all. Else if is something else happened, and then if is the original condition. The next two things that I want to cover in here in the control statements are loops. And as the name implies, a loop repeating itself over until a certain condition is met. So let me actually diagram that even better. So we have an initial condition, and that condition, if it is true, is going to send it to procedure, condition, and that is if yes, this happened. Otherwise, no. And then we continue with our program. So the way that these conditions work, there's two ways that there are in the conditions. There's one that is a while that basically works this way. While this condition is true, then do the work. So for example, while the laundry is dirty, wash it. While there's dishes out, pick them up. It's something that is constantly repeating. While there's bills to pay, work. While there is exams or things like that, study. It's a constant loop. In the case of the second one, it's known as a for loop. And a for loop, this is a while. This is a while, this is an if, and this is a for. In this for, let's assume that we have a bunch of elements to evaluate. So for example, names. So we have John, Paul, George, and Ringo. And a for will allow us to iterate over each one of these guys until we don't have elements there. So these are really useful for, like basically list or going through elements of objects. A while is just to repeat it while that condition is met. Just very simple. In here, the for, it is here. There's three versions where you have something that you can have a built-in counter, or you go for each item in a list, or each key with a value in a dictionary to iterate dictionaries, which we have here, list here, and numbers. We're going to review those on a future class. But for now, I just wanted you to understand those control structures. While is expressed right here, and then there's other utility stuff that we have. So in the case, going back to our tip thing, the way that we input the data app is that we had text that had something like this. So the easiest way is if the text is 15%, because we know that there's a finite elements in that list that I set up, we can just straight convert it to 1.15. And if it is 10%, then we're going to convert it to 1.10, and so on. So what we need to do is then, in this guy here, we're going to select the if, then, else. Notice that I'm not selecting this guy here. I'm selecting this guy. Why? Because this one returns a value. So what I need to put is that in the then or the else, I'm going to return a value. So in this particular case, I am going to verify in the logic if the value that I'm getting is 15%. So I'm comparing the text of this 15%. Again, I went here into text to select this guy, the empty text, so that I can fill it up. And then I can also grab, by hovering here, I can grab the values that I'm passing as arguments for the function. When I do this thing here, I could put as many elements as I want just to be able to pass arguments to the function. And those arguments are going to help the function or the procedure to work correctly. So now that we've got that 15%, then if it is true, then we need to return, rather than a string, we need to return a number. And in this case, we are going to return 1.15. Again, I'm going off of my list here that because I am receiving a text, I am changing it to a number. Notice that those two are different data types. One is a number, the other one is just text that happens to have numbers, but the computer doesn't know how to recognize the difference between text and numbers. So we gotta be explicit. The computer is not smart. The computer only does what we tell it to do. And if we tell it something wrong, the computer is only going to do that thing wrong. Next element is that we're gonna throw another similar if else inside. So notice we are nesting them so that we can go after all the three values in here. Not the prettiest code, but I'm trying to just go for the simplest so that it's easier to understand. Right now, the goal is not to make pretty code. The goal is to help you to understand how programming works and get it in an app just for fun. Then we're gonna set up the next comparison. And in that comparison, we're gonna compare if we have 10%. And did we put 10%? Let's just double check. 15, 18, and 20. So I'm gonna do 15, 18, and then if the value that we have equals this, then we're gonna return 1.18. And then we're gonna, that is also another tip that I wanted to give you. I don't have to be going all the way down here and choosing. If I just click outside and I start typing numbers 1.2, it automatically drops that number like this. Okay, so now that I've got this function, we have from our puzzle, from our entire formula, we have these two. I'm going to go after this function right here, the overall. So I am going to set up a new procedure and I'm going to select the one with a result and I'm gonna get it calculate total. Notice again, I am not using any single component in here. I am not telling it to get anything from the label, the text, all that. I'm doing it all in functions that are separated because I want my logic to be independent of my controllers. In here, I am going to set up 1 input, 2 inputs, 3 inputs, and 4 inputs. Why 4 inputs? Because I have 1, 2, 3, and 4. So because of that, I'm gonna call it subtotal, the first one. The second one, I'm gonna call it Tip Multiplier. The third one, I'm gonna call it Tax Multiplier. I'm gonna put it lowercase in the beginning, just because that's Java-like or Python-like naming. Well, Java-like, the camel case naming convention. Python has a different one. And then the last element is a friend count. Those are the elements that I'm gonna have in my function. And in order for me to do this, I need to multiply all these guys, but also then I'm going to grab that and divide it. So I'm gonna have this guy divided by, I'm gonna connect it here, divided by the friend count. And the multiplication in here, I'm gonna make it so that it's 3 numbers rather than 2. I did it the same way by pressing this guy and adding those elements. The same way that I did it with functions. So now here I'm gonna add the subtotal, the multiplier, and then the tax multiplier. Okay, sounds excellent. Then what I'm going to do, now that I have got my multipliers, actually what I would like to do, because the tip multiplier, I am going to call my procedures. So I'm gonna remove these two. because what I want is to call these two functions from here. So in procedures, I'm going to do call get input value with the multiplier. And then for here, I'm going to call tip multiplier and get tip multiplier. And the reason why I'm doing this, when my button, where's the button here, is pressed, I can do this by passing directly the values into this function, and then it just formats everything for me. So from here, I'm going to call here, and then I'm going to call here, and then I'm going to return the value here, and then I'm going to call this guy and return the value to this one. So the puzzle thing is actually telling us how it's all going, and I'm going to help you understand it in a better way. But I'm going to initialize a local variable that I'm going to call total, and that variable is going to be by calling calculate total, which is going to call this function. And in this area that it has nothing to do, here I haven't touched any of the components on the screen. Here is the only place where I'm going to do it, because I am doing it from an action of the screen. So in here, and that is just, it's a preference, but it leads to good programming habits. There's a technique called Model View Controller, or MVC, which basically tells us that the data should be processed separately from the view, which is this guy, and there's a controller that links them all together, but the data part doesn't really know or how to interact with the view. So I'm doing this to separate that view into an area that it only knows about that view, and then everything else is handled separately. The subtotal is going to come from here, from the subtotal. It's a good thing that we renamed it, and we're going to put the text. The tip multiplier, I'm going to come back to that because I want to highlight something here, but I'm going to put the tax multiplier from the tax input, and then the tax text, and then I am going to do also the friend count by using this, and I'm going to look for the text in here. Now let's go back to this one, the tip multiplier. And the tip multiplier is coming from a list. So there's no really text value in here. There is a selected value that we are gonna choose. So we're gonna get that tip list selected, because again, this is a list where we are selecting those existing values. So here I'm going to select from the tip list the selection. Then, because I am setting it up to a variable, but I need to set it into the total label. So I am going to grab in the total display, set total display text to, and I'm going to set it up to this value variable that we calculated. Now, let's go and test it. And let's see. If I have 5 friends and say $100, and I'm going to do 20% of tip plus 10% of tax. Oh, this is exactly where I wanted to get to. Because when we do something wrong, we're going to get this runtime error. And the runtime error is telling us, this is where I wanted to get us, because I want you to learn how to also troubleshoot. If I give you everything working, it's not going to help you. So in this case, the operation Yale divide cannot accept the arguments 20% and 100. So in this case, we're getting this error. And what I want to do is to start troubleshooting why is this guy failing. So we are seeing that the operation cannot accept the arguments. So one of the things that I was doing wrong is that I selected tip multiplier twice. So let's fix one of those, and then let's. But in theory, it shouldn't really affect the information here. But it actually was not this function, because we were dividing it. It got called incorrectly, so we were calling it wrong. But you can see what I wanted to see is that the do it result was 26.4. When I'm calling some of these functions, I can even try to troubleshoot it. So for example, if I'm going to do get tax multiplier, and I can duplicate by right clicking, I can duplicate this guy, get tax multiplier, or we're going to call get tip multiplier because that's what we're calling it. I could actually, let me even remove it. Let's even go for whatever random value here that I'm going to put. So I can put 15%. I can test it right here by doing do it, and it's going to return me that value as a comment. Which now, if we go back, because it did process it correctly, now I'm getting 26.4. If I change it to 15% because I'm cheap, I'm switching it to 25.3. Yeah, so that is a very basic way of building this application with the controls, the texts, the procedures, and also we reviewed how to troubleshoot. Again, not every guy of these has it. There's no do it here. There's only do it when you call the function, and you can highlight the procedure in here. Basically, we can also do it in here in certain operations, not in the full procedure, but we can do it here where it's going to also prompt us how much value that we want to put. So for example, we can put like 100, and it's telling us that 100, it's giving us 2. These ifs and other components do it, but the procedures themselves don't. So for example, I can do it and say enter the values for value, then I can put 15%, and it's returning 1.15. So these are multiple ways of us troubleshooting our code, which is beautiful, because if I know that there's a problem within this part, which is just a multiplication, not the division, I can go and do both the division and the multiplication. But here I can do just the multiplication part and say, okay, I'm going to say that it's going to be 100, it's going to be 10, and then 15%, we can do that. And now it's telling us that the total is going to be 126. Now that is what we need to then divide by the number of friend counts. Anyway, this is really useful for step-by-step checking your code and making sure that your code is as clean as possible and as stable as possible. Again, to recap, we reviewed procedures, and procedures are functions, are ways for us to perform a certain work that might be repetitive, and also it might help us to isolate ideas. These ideas are just these tiny little thoughts that are very self-contained, and they only perform one operation. By keeping them this way, we don't bulk everything into this area and then make a mess. We are making them small enough that they're going to be reusable by some other parts of the software, or some other software if you make a library. And that's the idea of the procedures. The other thing that we reviewed, just to recap, is that we saw the if-else control structure along with loops like for and the while loop. The while means that it's just going to be repeating until a condition is met. And the for, it's going to be jumping on a series of items one by one. We also did a little bit of the math operators by using comparison of numbers, additions, multiplications, and divisions. These are a lot of other function stuff that we're going to look at when we do our next project. We're going to be focused very heavily on this. We did a little bit of the logic to perform comparisons. The logic ones, these guys are just a comparison between two things, and they need to return a true or false. In the case of math, we're going to be comparing in this one two numbers, and they have to return true or false, but this is just a comparison of numbers. This is a comparison of different things. Could be numbers, could be string, could be different things. In this case, it's just basically numerical And when we have something like this, we have other things. Why do we need a logic comparison and a math comparison? The difference is here. This is just testing whether they're equal or not. In the situation of math, we can compare if something is equal, greater, lesser than, or greater or equal than, or lesser or equal than another value. So we have more operators. So that's why we need two different operators here in blocks area. Also reused some of the variables, and I showed you the backpack. So I hope you found this video useful, and if it's too slow, the good thing is that there's a button there that allows you to pause it or even go half speed. I just had a limited time that I needed to fit all this information in one session. If you really like this video, I would appreciate a subscription, and hope you like it and that you found this useful. Thank you very much.